Okay, so I'm now going to show you how to answer the final part of our production exam here, this question 5 from the 2022 AS-Q4 paper. Quite a mixture of easy and difficult ones. What you'll notice on this last page of the exam, they will always ask you to do these two things, and we're always going to follow this similar sort of procedure to do them. So we're not going to do this just yet, but we're going to have to balance the mix, so that's getting up the levels sort of to a stylistic way where what we would expect it to be like. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then producing the stereo mix, which often seems like a very easy question, but I know that some of my students often rush that one and actually lose some marks on there. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. But let's finish 5A, B, and C first. So 5A, we're applying reverb to just the snare. So I'm just going to underline some bits that might help us. So just to the snare, not to any of the other drums, just in bar 8. And this is where a lot of my students went wrong or didn't achieve 3 out of 3 here. It should be the same type. So when you think about what type of reverb it is, level, so the volume of the level reverb is in the dry and the wet values, and length, okay, as the reverb is the hand clap, so we have something to listen to in 33. Let's see how well you can hear it through my capture here. So in bar 33. So if we just solo our drums here, you can hear that reverb tail and then it suddenly cuts off. So it's either a very short reverb or a gated reverb. It really is a gated reverb, but if you went for a very short sounding reverb, they would also give, you'd be able to get top marks. Da da da, and then there's some reverb, and it just stops, cuts off immediately. So we need to go for a very short reverb or a gated reverb. Just on our snare drum in bar 8. So let's flick back to bar 8, find that snare drum hit. It's there. So it's nice because there's no other drums happening at the same time, so it's very easy just to isolate that drum. Again, I'm going to right click over on the track here and do new track with duplicate settings. So if I did have any effects or anything on this drum track, they'd be copied across because I'm going to put just this one hit on its own channel, so I can apply reverb to it. So I'm just going to do that. I don't want to duplicate it. I want it completely out of this first one, so I'm not going to hold Option and drag it down. I'm just going to drag it down, so it's just on its own. We've taken it out of that track, put it in a new one, and just so I don't forget, I'll double click over here and call this drums verb, just so I don't forget what it is. Okay, so I need a nice short reverb. I wouldn't say if they talk about the level. How loud is the reverb signal? Is it just as loud as the dry signal, or is it similar? So it's quite a loud reverb, really. It's quite tinny, almost metallic sounding reverb as well. So let's see if we can find something similar. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be similar. Okay. So I'm just going to solo just this drum hit here. Across the top. So you might want to jump in, or you definitely want to jump in and put a reverb on there. So you could go for, there's a bunch of different reverbs here in Logic, but the latest one, and probably highest quality one, is this chroma verb here. So before I even listen to it, I'm going to go for something, first of all, that's quite short. So I'm going to bring my decay of the reverb down, maybe to about half a second there. Something maybe a bit metallic sounding. Let's try this reflective hall here. And it's quite loud, so I'm actually going to have the reverb be quite loud and bring that wet value up like that. Let's see how that sounds. I'd say that's good. If anything, it just needs to be maybe a little bit shorter in the decay. Let's try exactly half a second. Maybe just a touch less reverb as well. That sounds good to me. Sounds like a bit of a gated reverb just because it's so short, even though we haven't actually put a gate on there. I can show you how you would do a gated reverb in a moment, but let's just listen to these again, see if it sounds similar. Sounds similar enough. Obviously, these are hand claps and mine's a snare drum, so it's quite hard to compare the two. But if you wanted to do a gated reverb, what you would do is you're going to have a longer reverb decay, so maybe 2 seconds. But you are going to put a noise gate on after it. So this is going to cut off the sound when it goes below a certain threshold. So let's have a listen. You can hear it's opening and then closing. If I want it to last a bit longer, I can bring the threshold down. That's a bit too long. To make it less sort of juttery, I can put some release on there. That would also work. So that's how you wanted to go about that question. Obviously, I just applied that reverb to my drum reverb track, just this one hit, not the whole thing. Okay? So moving on, real difficult question now, but there was sort of an easy way to go about it. I know my students had only just or not even quite really started experimenting with flex pitch, so this was quite a tough one when we did this one. So when it says a clean version, it doesn't mean there's any swearing or anything in it. You'll hear what they've got in bar 35 has sort of a distortion and tons of hiss on it. So they want you to recreate this I Feel Alive in bar 35, but a clean version, so with no distortion. So meaning we're going to have to find different parts from the track and sort of recreate them with those materials. So it tells us that we know that the I part comes from bar 31, and the other words, Feel Alive, we'll find in 34. So we need to re-pitch, okay? So we'll have a go at that now. So if we jump over into 35 here, we're looking at the vocal, which I've got here at the bottom. Again, I'm going to make it nice and big so I can see what I'm doing. So it's here in bar 35, you'll hear this distortion.
I feel alive, I feel alive.
So they want us to recreate this bar 35, but without any distortion. And it tells us we're going to use parts of 34 and parts of 31. So that part in 31, that note's already the right pitch. So I'm just going to grab that. Again, like we did with the question, I'm going to right-click over on my vocal track and create a duplicate track just below it with all the same settings. I'm going to grab this I here, so I'm going to Command-T, either side of it, Command-T on this side, and just grab that and drag it. I want to create a duplicate of it because I want this to still stay there, the part of this track. So I'm going to Option-click and just drag it over here. I'm going to match this I up now with this first I in 35 that is distorted. So if I play them together, I should hear, yes, I'll hear this one's distorted, but I should hear that they're the same pitch.
Live,
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And now we just need to get this Feel Alive part. So you can hear in the previous bar, they told us to find it in 34. But that one's going Feel Alive. And this one's Feel Alive. So we need to grab these 3 syllables or 3 notes and re-pitch them, okay? So I'm going to grab them here, Command-T either side, and I'm going to Option-click and sort of line them up here below. Again, I'm just going to line them up as closely as I can.
I feel alive. I feel alive.
Okay, so now we need to go about changing the pitch of these Feel Alives to be the same as the distorted one. And this was not something I had showed my students before they did this exam, and it really helped you. So I saw lots of students. One way you could have done it is to try put a tuner on here. So gone to metering and tried to look at what pitch they were singing, or you could have tried to use your ear.
I feel alive.
So you could see it went A, G, C. An R1 definitely doesn't do that. But there's actually a much better way to do that, and it's to use Logic's flex pitch. So it's tuning. So what we do to use flex pitch is we click this little sort of DNA looking thing next to our automation button. Click on there. Click where it says monophonic, and we're going to go to flex pitch there. Now you'll see what Logic has done. It's gone through this whole singing take, and it's showed me on a piano roll what she sings. So A, I, G, feel, then sort of around an E, feel alive. Well, let's put flex pitch on this other track and we'll see what we've got. So we've got our A, but then it goes down to a C, and then a B and a C. So the C is fine at the end. That's the right pitch. So all we need to do really is just actually take this feel and make it a G. So we can just grab this feel note here and bring it up to a G. Okay? This can sometimes introduce some glitching and sort of aliasing sounds, but as long as the pitch is right, the exam board will be pretty happy. So I can grab this fine pitch and get it right on the G here. Okay? And then this one needs to be up. It's a B at the minute. We really need it to be about an E. Okay? So if we have a listen to our track now, it might sound a little bit weird, but it should be the right pitches.
I feel alive.
I'll just solo it so you can hear it a bit better.
I feel alive.
Yep, so that's, you can hear when you change the pitch of something quite drastically, it does make the vocal sound a little bit odd, but our pitches are right now. So if we listen to the original example, the distorted version we were copying.
I feel alive.
Da, 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 da. Does ours still do that?
I feel alive.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. We could go in and change the timing a little bit, so ours is a bit rushed here at the end. So one thing you could do is sort of split this and try to get the words to be a bit more on beat. So I could chop here. You can see mine's a little bit late compared to the original. So I'm just going to drag these and pull them back a bit here. Like that. Should sound a bit better.
I feel alive.
That's sounding much better. Now, the last thing I need to do to make sure I don't lose any marks is to delete the distorted version. Do not leave that in your mix or you'll lose marks. So I'm going to delete that. And now, it might sound a little bit of the odd here, but my pitches are right, the rhythm's right, and I've recreated a clean version of that part.
I feel alive. I feel alive.
Okay, so that's how you would get the full marks on that question. Right, so moving on, we're adding a quarter note delay to the vocal. It must be audible but not dominate the vocal, the dry vocal. So some of my students, when they've done this question, have put delays with a really high wet value on, meaning the delay signals are almost as loud as the original signal. We definitely don't want that. And there must be 3 repeats, okay? And it must be on for the whole song. So again, an easy mistake people could make is, well, I've got 2 vocal tracks now. This is my vocal tuned, what we just did. So if I just put my delay on this one, I could lose marks towards the end here because this one wouldn't have any delay on it. So what I'm going to actually do is create a track stack. So many of my students did this as well. So select both of them. Then we can put an effect on just the track stack and it will go on both of them. So a summing track stack. And I can call this Vox. Right, so let's put a delay on here. It didn't say a stereo delay or anything like that, so I'm just going to go for a standard sort of delay. So delay here. And I'm just going to go for this one called echo because it's the most simple one. So they told us it needs to be a quarter note. So let's move that to be a quarter note like that. And we need to change the feedback so that there's exactly 3 repeats. That means 3 repeats after the dry signal. So you'll hear dry, wet, 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 dry, wet, wet, wet. Lots of people did 2 delays because they included the dry as one of those, if you know what I mean. Now, because I've put this echo plugin on what's a track stack or an auxiliary track, it's made it so I don't hear any of the original signal, but hear only delays. Lots of my students did this and left that on, meaning the vocals were a crotchet out of time for the whole track. The dry value should be full, and the delay or the wet value should be much less. We don't want that to dominate the vocal. So let's just have a listen here and try to get that at a nice value where we can still hear the delay, but the main dry original vocals definitely are on top.
I wanna fly, I wanna fly. I feel alive, I feel alive.
So even at you gotta trust your ears and not your eyes. So that looks like the delay is very quiet in comparison to the vocal, but actually still quite loud. So I'm gonna bring it down just to about 20. Okay, you can hear because my feedback value, this measures how many echoes I get, how many copies I get. And you can hear just in the silence here, I'm getting more than 3. There, it was still echoing, echoing, echoing. I only want 3 repeats. So I'm going to start bringing this feedback value down. Let's see how many repeats I have at about 30 here. So the first one doesn't count. The first bit of signal we heard does not count because that is the actual dry signal, the waveform you can see here. So I only heard 2 there because I had the original and then 2 copies. Original, 1, 2. So we need a bit more. Bring that feedback up a bit. That's perfect. So I heard the original, then 1, no, 1, no, 1, no, 3. We needed 3. Okay? So that's sounding good to me. I'm happy with that. Okay, and now this last part. Almost everyone in my class lost marks on this balancing of the mix. You can see what they purposefully do is give you some tracks that are very quiet and some that are very loud. So my drums they've given me are fairly loud. The bass track they've given me, look at the waveform. Ooh, you can see it's quite small and quiet. So that bass, even if I grabbed my volume fader and turned it all the way up here, it's still way too quiet. I know I'm on laptop speakers, but it's still really quiet. Especially for dance music like this, the bass should be one of the loudest things. So it probably needs to be a couple decibels louder. So what I could do is click on my bass clip here, go over to the region, and add some gain, maybe 4 decibels of gain. My bass is sounding quite a good volume now. There's other ways, obviously, you can add volume. You could have put a gain plugin on audio effects, or even on EQ. The EQ plugin you can just on the side here. I'll show you. Even on the EQ plugin, you can just add gain like that. So however you did that, but you really needed to turn that bass up because it was really quiet. Okay, let's see what else. Remember, in this sort of music, the vocal needs to sit on top. The vocal needs to be the loudest thing. So does my vocal ever get lost? I can already hear that my keyboards, and lots of my students lost marks for this, my keyboard or my synthesizer that we worked on earlier is really loud. It's getting in the way of my vocal. So that vocal, I could turn it up, but then everything might start clipping if I'm always turning things up. So really, I need to turn my keyboard down. Now, in one of the previous questions, let's have a look. This question here on the keyboard, we automated some volume. So I imagine this is what lots of my students did. They tried to grab this volume fader and say, okay, let's turn it down 5 decibels. But you'll see, because the volume is automated, as soon as I play my track, my volume jumps back to its original position, so because it's automated. So the way you could have answered this question, really, is you could have gone into your keyboard track here. And you could have gone back to your automation and turned it down there, so you could have taken it down on here, but then you would have messed up your marks for later if you didn't turn it back down on here. So that's why volume automation can sometimes mess you up a bit. So what I'm going to do is just go into my synthesizer, RetroSynth here, and just turn the volume of the synth down. I'm going to mix it from in the synth, so I'm not messing with my volume automation. So I'm going to go to a part where the vocals are singing. Okay, so I feel like my bass and my keys are sitting well together now. I am just going to add a little bit of volume to the vocals. Again, I need to do that on my vocal group that I've made. I don't want to just turn up one of these because I've got it over 2 channels. So I'm going to go to my vocal group. And again, there's lots of ways I can just turn up gain. Easiest way Sometimes it's just to go on the EQ and add some gain on the side here. So let's add 4 decibels gain.
Flying out of my universe. Flying out of my universe. I wanna.
Okay, so that sounded like a pretty good mix to me. I can, even on my laptop speakers, preferably I'd be using headphones or some monitors, but I can hear everything sounds pretty good and pretty balanced there. I can hear all the different individual elements. So I'm happy that I've mixed that track now. I've produced a balanced mix. Okay, so now it's down to this last question where lots of people, it's so simple but can easily lose marks. So we need to ensure the mix output is at as high a level as possible. So they want something that's peaking around -3, -4 decibels. You can see mine now is probably a little bit hot. Just what we were listening there, I was actually clipping by 0.3 decibels. So I'm going to go to a loud part of the track. I can see my drums are pretty loud in this bit coming up. So I'll listen. I'm peaking around. So just at moments there, I'm getting really close to clipping. I don't want to lose marks for having a mix that's clipping. So I'm just going to take a little bit off my fader here, maybe 2 decibels. Even there, just on that word I almost peaked, was about still only had about 0.4 headroom. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit more. Maybe -3. I'll check that part again. I feel alive. I feel alive. Cool, so I'm happy with that. Some people quite often turn in mixes where they've seen, okay, make sure there's no clipping. So they've then brought their master down massively. But we do not turn in music with 12 decibels of headroom for a master or for an output. We want something that's a healthy, loud volume, really. So we found that sweet spot for this track, or my project here was about -3. As long as you're sort of generally above about -9. That's perfect. Okay, so we've got it at a nice high level, but not distorting. We're not limiting or compressing. We've got no audio effects on our outputs. That's fine. Then we need to make sure our lead in and lead out times are not too long. So I think this is where lots of my students messed up their projects because they thought, okay, I need to trim this time off the start. So they started moving things around and trimming bits off. That's not what you want to do. Just leave everything where it is and use your cycle window here at the top. Wherever you've got this set is where the track will bounce out. So I'm just going to zoom in to the very start and give myself maybe 1 crotchet beat here at the start. So that's much less than a second. I could even bring it in just a little bit more. Okay, so I'm happy there's a bit of lead-in time there. And then at the end, we need to make sure that there's a little bit of lead-out time. Remember, we've got delay and reverbs on things. So delay and reverbs, although it looks like the tracks have ended, they might keep going. So we need to triple check that it doesn't go over. Okay, so definitely by sort of the first beat or second beat here of 38, those tracks have died away and finished playing. So I'm going to put that bounce loop or this cycle loop there. So I've made sure that I've got not too long of a lead in time and not too long of a lead out time. And then we just need to bounce that out as we've bounced out our other bits as a 16-bit 44.1 WAV file. So I can do Command B for bounce. Remember, it's file bounce, but you want to be quick in these exams, so Command B. Ooh, one thing as well, I'm making sure I've not got anything muted that I need, or I've not got things in here like the examples, which I don't want. I'm also making sure I've not got my metronome on. If you turn your bounce in with a metronome on, you are automatically limited to 1 of 3 marks on this final question. So if there's a metronome on, you lose 2 marks. Really important. We are always taking that metronome off when we're bouncing things. So then we're just going to bounce it as a WAV file, 16-bit, 44.1, and we're just going to bounce that to wherever we need or have been instructed to bounce it in the exam. And that's that last page of the 2022 AS paper.